Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's very special broadcast. I'm Francke, the Chief Executive of the Chartered Management Institute, and today I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome my very special guest, Dame Stephanie "Steve" Shirley. Dame Stephanie, or Stevie as she's known, has been a semi-companion for many years, and in 2018 won our Lifetime Achievement Award. She is a tech pioneer, an ardent philanthropist, and a workplace revolutionary. And I'm absolutely delighted to have her here with me today. Welcome, Stevie. It's great.
It's lovely to be with you, Anne. Really enjoying it.
So tell us, you've had such a fascinating life. What were your early years like in this country?
Well, Anne, I'm glad you asked about that, because I do believe that one's life is, and certainly one's business life, and we're talking to CMI members and people interested in management, is all based on performance. And one of the things that really drives performance is motivation. And my motivation definitely comes from my early childhood in this country. I arrived at the age of 5 in England and was an unaccompanied child refugee. I was just with my 9-year-old sister, poor thing. We had a traumatic exit from Nazi Europe. And that has given me really a need to justify why I was saved from the Holocaust when so many people, including 1 million children, actually died. And that has really driven me. I have to make mine a life that was worth saving. I have to work better today than I did yesterday. And so I do have a lot of energy, and I've put it towards my business life, and it has made me not only what I am, but I also feel that I have been able to do what is in me to do. And I think in a business environment, you need to have that sort of energy and drive and motivation.
Well, that is incredibly important. Of course, you went on to found your own company, a tech company. Tell us, what made you decide to do that?
Well, people think that everybody starts companies to make money. And we were not an overnight success. You know, we never paid a dividend for 25 years. So, I mean, that really sets the tone. But what I set up a company for was to provide for me and other women an environment in which we are valued. We could work flexibly in the way that women always seem to want to work. Whenever you do any survey of women's employment desires, the two things always come up, work-life balance and flexibility. And I've set up a company. I was sick and tired of being told, basically bumping up against the glass ceiling, called, you can't do this, that's not suitable for women, I need to do that. So I set up a company that was flexible to the extreme, that welcomed diversity, that worked in a team spirit, that gave me what I wanted, and which was access to professional level work, which I couldn't get in the corporate world. And so it started off as a crusade for women, and hasn't really changed much in my mind.
No, well, you had many challenges, I'm sure, and you alluded that there's still challenges, but tell us about some of the challenges you faced then being female.
I was marketing or selling in a very unsophisticated way, because nobody had told, certainly not women, about how to run a business. And what I did was I looked in the newspapers for advertisements for programmers and contacted each one saying, I'm not applying for your programming job, but I can provide you with programming services. Are you interested in meeting? And they were probably not very good letters, but they got absolutely no response whatsoever. And then my dear husband suggested that it was possibly my name was causing the problem, that double feminine, Stephanie Shirley. Since then, I've used the family nickname of Steve. The Americans call me Stevie. I sent the same letters in the same sort of way and began to get some replies, and was through that door and shaking hands before anyone realized that he was a she. And there was a little frisson of excitement, but I was through the door, had a good story to tell, I think, and began to get some work in.
Well, that's great. And of course, you pioneered several working practices that were well ahead of your time. Why don't you tell us some of those and whether or not you think they were key in driving your success?
I think the whole idea of flexibility, of making tasks into flexible, indirect costs. I helped start another company, and I can remember going on and on and on at the young entrepreneur. Keep fixed costs down. Keep fixed costs down, and that was reflected in the way in which I set up the business, where there were very few overheads. Everything was variable costing, and it was remarkable in that it pioneered part-time working, home working, job shares, annual hour contracts, not internships, we didn't do that, but we even paid people from a cafeteria benefits so that staff could say how they would like to be paid, as direct salary or as pensions or as car, and that gave an enormous quality of life to all the staff. We talked about staff, but actually some of them were formally employees, but most were consultants. We used the term panel, a term coming from market research. And this panel, we might have 800 people on the panel and 200 people employed, that sort of balance. It was predominantly flexible working. And in a sense, we introduced what we now call the gig economy to business, that you don't have to have large central overheads, that you can remain agile, you can remain fleet, you can remain responsive with properly trained panel members or consultants, associates.
And did you measure the productivity of that practice? Do you think that helped you be more productive?
Well, we didn't even need to convince ourselves that it was more productive. It obviously was. We were not traveling, we were not wasting time over the water cooler, we were getting on with the work. And we used to claim, though this was not a true metric, that we were 40% more efficient. Now, since the COVID-19 crisis, it's quite clear that companies are finding home working efficient. They're finding it different and they're having to get used to it, but they do find it efficient. And the measures that I've been told are something like more like 20% rather than 40%. Maybe that was small company statistics, where in a small company, everyone works at higher performance because there's next to no management required. And it's so close, you would know which child was ill this weekend.
Yes, absolutely. And we're going to come on to COVID in a moment. But turning back to you, what happened to the company after you left?
Well, I retired at 60, and it was what happened, as far as I was concerned, is very different to what happened to the company. The company floated on the main stock exchange. It changed its name to Zanza, and was on the FTSE 250 And it was a success until 2007, when it was taken over by a French company called Stereo, which was itself taken over by Software Stereo. So what's left of the company is now in the Stereo part of Software Stereo. It's still there. What lasts is some of the cultural issues, the team working, the trust in each other, the enjoyment of work, the fun we have in working together, all the softer issues of management, if you like. What happened to me was that I found I was very much backlined, and I did not find the move to retirement easy in any way, because that's my life, that's what I do. You wake up every morning, you're still battling, this speech, this requirement, this client, this demand. And I missed that. But I took myself off on a trip to Australia to see my sister who lives there. And that was absolutely lovely. And that helped make a break between a very vigorous professional career and so-called retirement. But I don't really believe in retirement. I want to go on working. I want to go on doing new things. I want to make new things happen. So gradually I moved to be a venture philanthropist, which is very similar to business. It's finding problems, it's finding solutions, it's making them happen. It's doing feasibility studies, it's making metrics are slightly different of different things. It's not just the money. And I've become really an avid philanthropist. I really enjoy it. I have so much pleasure in learning to give away the money that I've made myself wisely. I mean, I think it would be easy to give money away, wouldn't you? But it's not. You have to really think about what you're doing.
Yes, and you have some causes that you're very passionate about, and will you share those with us?
Well, I believe in philanthropy. One should always be giving to things that you know about, you're informed, but also that you care about. And there are really only two things that I seriously care about, and that is information technology, my professional discipline, and autism, which was my late son's condition. Mm-hmm. And so I started off supporting both those issues. And then a lot of other people started supporting computers in schools, computers in Africa, internet projects in the early days. And so we focused on autism. Mm-hmm. Because nobody else was really sponsoring autism projects. And I've set up about 4 charities, 3 of which I've taken to sustainability, several not-for-profits, all in the field of autism, and supported autism in, I think, 12 universities, supporting projects rather than the universities. And I am having a wonderful lifestyle because it uses all my business experience. It's like running small projects, large projects, interaction projects. There's so much going on all the time, and I feel it's even more worthwhile than my own company was.
Well, that's amazing. And of course, you've written a book about your wonderful life and all of your adventures and the things that you've learned. It's called Let It Go. I've read it. It's a fascinating book. I heartily recommend everybody listening to read it. And of course, it's being made into a major motion picture, is it not?
Oh, I can hardly. It was supposed to be this year, 2020. But with the coronavirus, it's obviously going to be next year. All in filmmaking, much to my surprise, I thought it would take months and months, but it doesn't. It all goes on planning. Just months and months of planning, and the actual filmmaking only takes a few weeks. That was a big surprise. But we have a lot of planning has now happened. We have a short list of actors who will take my part.
And who are they?
Emily Blunt and Claire Foy have been shortlisted, and I would be very happy with either of those. But because everything is deferred a year, will they be available next year? I think there's still some question about that. But
two award-winning British actresses at the top of their game, so they need to be to play you, Stevie.
Oh, that's nice. The emphasis is very much on women in business. It doesn't really talk much, the film is not going to really feature much about my philanthropy. And I think mention my refugee start only in flashback. So it's interesting to see a new medium to use in a creative way. What are they going to make of the book? The book took me 18 months to write and is as good as I'm going to get. I'm writing another book now, but that one is finished, and I'm happy with it. It was revised a few years ago, but it's such fun, really, moving things forward, driving things. What's happening with the book? All the design of the covers in it, all this is lovely, and that's how I want to live my life.
Absolutely. And what's your new book called, and what's it about?
Well, my new book is really a coronavirus project, because when all this happened and we were in lockdown, what am I going to do? And this is the time to write the book I've always wanted to. And so my second book is about the speeches that I've given all over the world, many, many years now. And I've selected 30 of them of different lengths and different topics. And published them, or am publishing them, in a most beautifully designed version called So to Speak. So it's just my speeches with a few little comments and a few photos, but all very elegantly designed.
That's wonderful. And of course, I'm sure one of those speeches is your famous TED Talk about the flat heads, right? So will you share that anecdote briefly for our audience?
Well, the TED Talk was the highlight of my speeching. They were very helpful. They sort of said, we want you to give the best speech of your life. And I think they did. Quite a short speech, 15 minutes long. And I talked there, I used humor quite a bit, because humor, I think, is international in some ways. I talked about women. I talked about how you can tell ambitious women by the shape of our heads. They're flat on top from being patted patronizingly. And that got a roar of laughter from a very large audience, which was a wonderful feeling.
Which is great. So I'm going to come on to the current. That's been your COVID project, so to speak, the book. Now, many people say COVID has changed working practices significantly. Do you agree?
Oh, to a computer buff like me, I am delighted to see things that I've been doing for 50 years actually recognized and being experimented and found effective by a whole new, and we've moved further in the last 10 weeks, or 20 weeks now, isn't it, than in the last 10 years to really turn ourselves into digital people, because cultures are very stable and people are not keen to change culture if it works. And so although we've been talking about home working, many organizations, I think 61% of organizations worldwide actually have a distributed working policy, but it may be we allow 1 day a week at home, or it may be that we allow some people home and certain times. And what it's finishing up with, I think, is the best of both worlds. Working from home is efficient, it is productive, it is nowadays secure, because that really is an issue when everybody's working at home. But you do miss the companionship, the collegiate atmosphere. You replace that with Zoom calls and interspersed with face-to-face meetings, but you become much more conscious about the need to communicate with the team. Have I explained this? Is this really understood? Should I be spending more time on this? And the formality of communications has made a real difference to management. And I think that will stay. We have learnt to communicate more, to communicate more regularly, not just informally over the water cooler, and things such as that. And I think
well, we're all in the same
really going to change is, I talked about motivation being necessary for performance. The other thing that's necessary is training. You know, motivation, training, and tools is what gives you performance. And the training, I'm sure, will all be digital in the computer, in the computer age. I don't think we're going to go back.
Yes, and many people do agree with you on that. Now, we are all in the same size box in our virtual world. Do you think that these changes help to drive diversity or not?
Well, so far, it hasn't been a happy history. So far, lockdown has really impacted women adversely. A higher proportion of women were furloughed in this country and lost their jobs worldwide with the economic problems associated with lockdown than men. Women working from home were all still picking up the majority of the domestic and childcare, and nowadays homeschooling that has been additional domestic pressure. And so to a rather nasty way, many women seem to have sort of slipped back to a lifestyle that I remember in the 1950s, where the woman was the little woman at home, making sure everything ran very smoothly and so on. And the man was the breadwinner and the prime motivator as to how life was lived. So I'm not too happy about how things have gone there.
No, so what can we do to address that as we're coming out of the recovery? What can we do to preserve the good practices that you mentioned, so flexible working and agility, and make sure that we don't disadvantage women as we come out of the recovery? What would you suggest?
Well, it's not the only good thing that's come out. What has become very obvious that in lockdown, many of us have been more contemplative about what we're doing, have thought more about issues such as youth versus age, have the elderly, have my generation started to really consider the strain that is going to be on the young people, have young people got respect for the old people with our increased vulnerability to the virus. These are issues that have been put on the back burner for so long. We really want to keep those, make sure that we still look after people who have no homes. I mean, in England, we have had people living on the streets for many years. Project after project tries to do something about it. Only in lockdown have we actually got people off the streets and living in decent, temporary, but at least living in decent environs. So we're becoming more conscious of our neighbours. This is the sort of thing that we need to grab, the idea that the world and everything in it is connected. This is how women are going to do.
And so to create a more equitable and just society, that would be something that you would recommend that organizations and all of us do coming out of COVID and into the recovery.
It's the opposite of what is happening because, again, I'm talking about the UK. The government has stopped some of its gender pay gap legislation that forced organizations to report on their gender pay gap. And for many corporates, the economic pressure is such that they've really sort of said all those niceties of diversity and so on really have to be forgotten at the moment. We're in survival mode. We're looking after our existing customers. We're looking after our supply chains. We're trying to get through this pandemic, which nobody's got experience of. The previous pandemic was in 1918, and that was not so worldwide as this. So nobody really knows. We're doing things experimentally, and I think worldwide we're doing well.
Yes, well, that's good. Maybe it'll drive more innovation. But as you say, a lot of people are struggling in the pandemic. You are such a calling card for resilience. What advice would you give to managers and leaders and those that are having a tough time?
Well, I've always, I suppose, emphasized the soft skills of management. I think we need to get together, we need to work cooperatively. And there have been one or two examples of people buying protective clothing, PPE, on a massive, scale in order to get the benefits of a size. But also having that renewed trust in each other. Do I really look at somebody if they've got a mask on? I can't see their expression. Do I really trust them? And yes, we do have to trust each other. And I think perhaps some of these national boundaries are beginning to look very different. Currently, they're very rigid, but those sorts of global issues have to be rethought by each and every company, organization.
Yes, there's certainly a lot of work to do. Now, you are a serial entrepreneur, whether it's in for-profit business or indeed with your many philanthropic, not-for-profit ventures. Many people out of work will rebirth themselves as budding entrepreneurs. And what advice would you give them?
Well, I don't think that's changed during the crisis. Concentrate on something that you know about, care about, get trained in it, get more trained so you're really at the cutting edge, and then just go for it.
Well, you certainly have gone for it, and you've been incredibly successful, and indeed continue to be very active in the pandemic with writing your books. And what are your looming projects, other looming projects you've got planned ahead?
Well, I'm going to keep quiet about those actually, because a lot of the entrepreneurs, we pursue several different targets simultaneously, and most of them, of course, fail. Like most new projects fail, most new businesses fail. So until we focus on one or two, this is what I'm going to do. I don't start long projects anymore because I may run out of energy, but I do try to do things that are new, that I try to, I suppose, think of things that other people haven't thought of. And I don't know where that innovation comes from. I know it doesn't come from a good education, which is very sad. But I think somehow our university educations put people into a rigid structure, whereas creativity in a business sense really comes from diversity. It comes from stress. I mean, a lot of beautiful things will come out of this crisis, things from art and music, as well as the surviving organizations. I mean, organizations have survived they have survived pandemics. during the war, the dreadful things, but companies did survive. And it's up to each and every one of us to make sure that our little company stays quality.
Well, that's great advice. And of course, you are a great testimony for both resilience and the energy that you alluded to. I'm now going to open it up to questions from the audience. And the first one is from Georgina, who asks, Steve, how have you maintained such energy and positive attitude while facing issues that arose? What's your secret?
The two things, really. One is the one that I've already talked about, this motivation that comes from my early difficult childhood, and nothing that the life can throw at me. I've also lost my son, I've had cancer, but nothing can actually compare with that refugee experience. New country, new family, new new food, everything is different. And that has given me, I have to justify my survival. But the other thing is I do very sensible things, Anne. I don't know about you, but I went swimming yesterday for the first time for months, but I go swimming regularly. I try and eat sensibly. I don't smoke anymore. I hardly drink. So I keep myself as fit as I can be. And I made a mistake many years ago of looking after my profoundly vulnerable son and getting mentally ill myself and having a breakdown. And I have learned now to look after myself and make sure that I am in top condition, if it were a dog. And so I try to sleep well. I try to enjoy life. And I do enjoy, work is not just something I do when I'd rather be doing something else. I so enjoy what I do.
And that shines through, and it's a great attribute and no doubt a big secret of your success. Our next question is from Harriet. Some people with autism have expressed pleasure at lockdown because they prefer the exchange of online meetings. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, information technology has always given hope to various forms of disability and odd conditions such as autism. Yes, the computer world suits people with autism much better than the. To work with a robot is easier to work with a human being, and we use that in one of my charities. Simply because it always responds in the same way. It is not so emotional. I feel in control of things. But the loss of lockdown has also removed some of the structure that all of us like and people with autism really rely on. So there's always been an anxiety issue for people with autism. It's the one thing that they say they would like help with. And the anxiety levels have gone up very significantly for those with autism, as they have, I think, for everybody else. I'm sure the divorce rate will go up, but the birth rate might go up as well. But it's not easy to be locked in. It's fine if you're in senior management, you've got a nice home, you've got a garden, but if you're a single parent living on the 7th floor of a block of flats with 2 young children, this is really stressful, and it shows throughout, and it's certainly impacting people with autism very, very adversely.
Yes, and indeed, mental health has come to the fore. It's another trend, as you referred earlier. My next question here is from Patrick. Steve, if you could wave a magic wand to get more women engaged in IT today, what might you suggest we could do?
I mean, we've been trying this for the last 50 years. We've been trying all sorts of projects. The level of, in this country at least, is round about the low teens, 13, 14%, and it hasn't really changed. I'm sure computers, especially artificial intelligence, will or should be designed differently if women were involved more at that early level. But as the designers are predominantly men, as the financiers of the projects are predominantly men, women, we find ourselves using equipment that doesn't really take our unique, well, they're not unique, but it doesn't take our gender attributes into account. And so I think we'll have to struggle on for many years. I don't have a magic wand. I wish I did. Some legislation has helped. I mean, I was battling against legislation. You were not allowed to do this. You couldn't work there as a married person. Women were not allowed to do that. You couldn't hire a car. You couldn't do any financial transactions without a male guarantor. That has gone. And today, women are struggling against the much more difficult cultural issues that you have drawn out. How can we make life more embracing of diversity? Some organizations, I would recommend that they look at the transgender issue. I've worked with 2 transgender cases in my career, one male to female and the other female to male, which was the more difficult to manage the sort of expectations of the group dynamics. When you have somebody who has changed sex, they're the same person with the same skills, the same history, but now a different gender. Very interesting to see how your organization handles that.
Absolutely. And we shouldn't forget that diversity does deliver better business results, and we constantly need to make that business case. But our next question is also around the diversity. It's from Namdi. And the question is, talking about the gender pay gap, is it time to also have a conversation on the age pay gap?
Ageism, that's another question. We don't do any studies of that at the moment. There are some countries in the world that have a different approach to age. They value age for what we have to offer, but they change their remuneration packages in a much more practical way. For example, a Japanese company that I know has ex-directors working in quite lowly positions within the group, and everybody loves it. They've been with the company so long, they're highly respected. The fact that they're acting as a receptionist or the equivalent is just welcomed. And of course, their remuneration pattern changes. So the remuneration may go up over the years, and then it starts to drop. IBM have a system where all their ex-directors remain on some honorarium, and quite a modest one, but are always there to support IBM, to come in when somebody, especially international visitors, would like to meet a senior that they met 20 years ago and they're still there. There are different ways of approaching ageism. I think age is how you behave, a bit as to how you feel, certainly not how you look. And it works in both ways. I mean, when I was 21, I think, I couldn't join a society except as a student. Now, I wasn't a student, I'd been working for 3 years already. So both young and old, we really have to come to terms with ageism and make it, again, more diverse, use everybody, use the skill. We don't have the agility anymore, but use the skill that a long career can give you.
Indeed, and of course, the life experience. Our next question is from Chloe. Would you advise somebody with ADHD autism to be vocal in the workplace about their condition? I sometimes feel like a burden as I work differently to others. I work hard and innovate. What advice would you give Chloe?
This comes up in different guises all over the place. I think it's better to be vocal and explain at the interview stage that this is a condition, that some adjustment is worth making, very small adjustments, and well worthwhile. A little bit of understanding of what ADHD is and what it means for the way people work, stressing the innovation and share different way of looking at things, and that's invaluable. Stirling University in Scotland did a study recently about where innovation comes from, and the big emphasis was on diversity. A little bit of training, and I'm really talking about, a manager talking to his team, we're having a new member coming in, I'd like you to think about this or be careful about that. I think much better to have it out in the open. There is a legal requirement, again, I'm talking about England, to take into account people's physical, mental, and emotional needs. And that mustn't be forgotten. Maybe the unions can help. I don't think so, but it's worth trying. But be open about it. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Be open about it. You have much to give.
That's great advice. And we do know that one of the first steps to encouraging any kind of diversity is to talk about it, get it out in the open. So I think that's great advice for Chloe. Our next question is from Jackie. With your extensive experience with philanthropy and also autism, what are your thoughts with regard to social entrepreneurs who are autistic? And do you know if there's a support network for them?
Well, I don't know if there's a support network for them, but there's some general national and international organizations that might be helpful. Can you repeat the first part of the question again, Anne?
Sure. So the question, I'm just trying to get it back on my screen. There we go. It's asking, what are your thoughts for somebody that's autistic and what is a social entrepreneur? Is there a support network that you could suggest?
Not that is specifically for entrepreneurs that I know of. That doesn't mean to say it doesn't exist. Perhaps one should start one. There are multiplicity of support organizations in any, and autism is one of them. What I do think is that to concentrate on the things that you know and care about. So if you're autistic, work in that area. You've got so much to give because you understand what the issues are. You understand what the pressure is on the family. You understand the national cost of these conditions, on the economics of the sheer lost employment costs, the reduced, about 7% of an employee, so try again, for someone with autism, only 7% of the costs in their whole life go on education. We must be able to do better than that. We must, because you go on learning all your life. I'm still learning today. I'm learning as well as teaching.
Which is brilliant. And so that's great advice for Jackie. There's so many problems that you with your autism can help solve. And that's what Stevie's advising. So this is an anonymous but good question. Could you apply your resilient optimism to the intersection of Brexit and COVID? do you see any opportunities emerging there?
Well, there are opportunities, and we've touched on some of them in this conversation, Anne. The opportunities of rethinking training, the opportunities of rethinking how we communicate. We're using Zoom at the moment, but I mean, I was talking about vision phones in 1987. You know, these things take a long time, and things will start off that we can start right now that will only happen during a pandemic, will only happen because we've got this culture at the moment, that will only happen, and we have to grab those opportunities and grow them. So to Mr. and Mrs. Anonymous, I'm more a glass half full sort of person, and I think there are opportunities now for entrepreneurs. There are also opportunities for society to get things a bit fairer.
That's a great answer. And we started this conversation with you talking about leadership and the qualities that motivated you. And our last question is, again, anonymous, but this person is asking, could you please highlight the 2 to 3 key leadership values that you wish business leaders would adapt in this digital workspace?
There are different forms of leadership. The leadership of our great Churchill during the war is quite different to the leadership that we used after the war, when we had a very managerial, low-key Clement Attlee. Women lead in a different way. Women like to be led in a different way. So the things that are common to that are, I believe, this business about motivation. The training is necessary. The tools of management are helpful, but the thing that you've got to have is that motivation. You need to like people. They may not like you. People don't particularly like me, but I like people. You need to have that feeling for the rest of the world, and sort of thinking of others, not just of yourself.
Well, that's a great place to end this conversation. It's been absolutely fascinating. I could talk to you all day, but I know that you've got places to go and projects to get on with. Stevie, it's been a huge pleasure, and we will keep in touch. And thank you all for joining us for this special edition. Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Oh.